Good morning. It's with a heavy heart that I want to dedicate this class to the victims of the terrible terrorist attack in Sydney, Australia. It's more painful when you know the people who were murdered. The rabbi I know, his father-in-law, who was his employer, is my closest colleague, and one of the children that were injured is a cousin of my sister-in-law. So this is very, very painful. Before we begin, I think it's important for me to address how we're supposed to respond to this. Obviously, we're filled with anger, sadness. Those are normal emotions, but they're not productive. They don't get us anywhere. This is a tragedy that happened on the eve of Chanukah. There in Australia, it was a Chanukah celebration. They're about 15 hours ahead of us. And Chanukah is all about light. The only way we could really go beyond this in a productive manner is to recognize that we have to bring more light into the world. Yes, there are people whose job it is to fight evil. There are people who are in the military and the first responders. These are people who deal with crises and deal with negative situations, and they're doing their job, and they should be commended for it. But that's not what most of us are capable of doing, and most of us have to find another avenue. And the other avenue is whenever there's darkness that rears its ugly head, we have to counter it with more light. And this ties into our class, actually. When we're talking about purpose, the first day of creation, what was the first thing that God created and recorded in Genesis? Light. And the Rebbe asked the question, who was around to benefit from that light? No one was created, not even animals, until much later. So why would he create light first? Let him create other things and then bring the light in. And the Rebbe's answer, very briefly, is that God, when he created something on the first day, he was determining what is the purpose of creation. What is the goal of creation? Why is everything else in existence? The ultimate goal is that the light, the divine light, should permeate the whole world. So God sets forth the agenda. The agenda is, Yehi Ar, let there be light. That's not just the words that God used. Those are the words that we have to use also. Let there be light. And the way we bring light into the world is through every bit of Torah that we're studying, as we're doing today. Torah is called Torah Or, the Torah of light. Every mitzvah is called a candle. Every time we do any act that is a divine act, we are bringing light into the world. And the goal is that this light should eventually flood the world and bring about the age of the Messianic era, an age about which the prophets refer to as an age of light, of the divine light, deluging, if there's such a word. The whole world will be submerged in this divine light. And especially when it comes to Chanukah, the essence of Chanukah is light. It's the most pronounced, the most dominant theme of Chanukah. Everything else revolves around it. Even the latkes that we eat is fried in oil, and the oil is used for creating light. So everything revolves around light. So we have to do everything to increase in the light by doing one more mitzvah, one more minute of Torah study. Everything happens by divine providence. And even evil that occurs is by divine providence. So why God does it is anyone's guess, and it's not productive to guess anyhow. We're not going to know the reasons for this type of suffering, for this type of pain, until Mashiach comes. So it's futile to try to rationalize it and try to find explanations for it. What we have to do is we have to learn lessons from it, and we have to apply it to our own lives. And what the primary lesson is to increase more light. Even though I said that everything is by divine providence, including the evil that happens, that doesn't take away from the fact that we have free choice to be participants in that darkness, or to be the ones who fight the darkness by bringing light. That's our choice. We could choose to turn on the lights or turn them off, or leave them off if they're already off. That's the only thing that we could choose. Everything else is in God's hands. So I just want to share another story or two of divine providence as an introduction to what we're going to be discussing today. One of the very prominent speakers in Chabad community, Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, if you go to the internet, you'll find he gives thousands of classes. He's one of the most articulate and speakers of Judaism. And he tells the story that he was scheduled to travel to a town for Shabbos, for the weekend, to speak. He saw it all over the world. And the last minute, I guess it was before he had to get to the airport to take the plane on Friday, he was told that the whole thing was canceled. It was something to do with some political things. He didn't elaborate what it was, but he was extremely upset, extremely angry that not only was it, he wanted very much to go. At that point in time, he needed the money as well. The money didn't hurt, and it was certainly going to be helpful for him. And what bothered him is that it was because of something political. It was not a nice thing, and he was really, really upset. So he stayed home for Shabbat. And this was Friday night. He lived in an apartment house. He had an apartment, and 2 floors above his apartment, he rented another apartment for his office. Now he's in his apartment Friday night, and he's extremely irritated. He just couldn't get to himself. He just couldn't recover. He goes to sleep, and he can't fall asleep. He was so disturbed that he just couldn't fall asleep. Now it's 2-3 a.m., and he's still not able to fall asleep. He decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to my office and maybe study something. He goes up the stairs, reaches the 3rd floor, I think it was, and he sees a teenager sitting on the stairs in an extremely depressed state. So he goes over and he says, "Could I help you? What's wrong?" And the guy was very upset at him. "Don't, leave me alone." First he didn't respond, then he says, "Leave me alone." And the more he said, "Leave me alone," the more he felt he had to do something. So he starts to talk to him and ask him, "Please tell me what's wrong. Maybe I can help." And the man just either didn't respond or just attacked him verbally. And at one point, when Rabbi Jacobson didn't let go, he just stood up and ran into another apartment. And Rabbi Jacobson ran after him. And the guy slammed the door in Rabbi Jacobson's face, but he put his foot in the door so he couldn't lock. And he pushed his way in. Rabbi Jacobson is a strong guy, is a heavy-set guy. He pushed his way in, and the guy starts shouting at him, "What are you doing? What are you doing? I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have anything to do." And he sees him running in the kitchen, taking out a little bottle of pills. And he's about to take these pills. And Rabbi Jacobson grabs it from him and doesn't let him do it. And he wrestles him. They were wrestling. And after a while, he finally gets him to calm down. And he spent the next few hours talking him out of taking his life. And later on, the guy turned out to be all right. And Rabbi Jacobson realized, imagine that if I would have gone on this weekend and I would have felt so good about myself that I gave a good talk and I got some money for it and everything else, this young man would not have survived. So that's his story of divine providence. I'll tell you another personal story where things just worked out very nicely. I call it the JetBlue Blues. In the first few years that JetBlue was operating, I remember they were very, very good with the service. They were very kind, very polite, and very accommodating. I remember, I think it was one of the first flights, it was from Buffalo. The CEO of JetBlue was on the flight and he was giving out snacks to everyone, the CEO himself. But anyhow, that's not what the story is about. The story is about, I'm traveling to New York and I'm sitting in one of the back rows, and there were 3 people sitting in that row, and then I see a little bit ahead of me, there was one person at the window seat and the other 2 seats were vacant. So I thought, you know what, it might be more comfortable to sit in the aisle and not have anyone in between. That was my only consideration. And then as we're on the ground, on the tarmac, I started to talk with this young man. It turns out he was a UB student and who was Jewish. I said, oh, very good. We have to start talking about something Jewish. Now on the screen, it had the altitude of the plane. The plane is still on the ground, but somehow it said 613. So I had a perfect way of starting a conversation. I looked at him, I said, do you know what 613 is? He had no clue. He said, there are 613 commandments in the Torah. So we start talking about the Torah and commandments. It was a perfect segue. And then we take off, and as soon after we take off, we get an announcement from the pilot that there's a little problem. The problem is that the wheels did not go back into the fuselage. And we don't know if the wheels are straight or crooked. But at any rate, we can't go at the right speed. We have to go at a lower altitude because of the wheels, and we can't go as fast as we normally go, so the flight will take a little longer. I thought, okay, big deal. As we're going slowly, I look at the screen, and how fast are we going? 358. So I turn to the student and I say to him, do you know what 358 is? He had no clue. I said, that's the numerical value of the word Mashiach. And I remember saying, I think this is going to be an interesting flight. Little did I know that it was much more interesting than anything I could have imagined. Because during the flight, I saw one of the flight attendants running down the aisle, taking something out of one of the bins. And I have a rule that I don't get scared when there's turbulence on a plane. I look at the flight attendant. If she's nervous, then I get nervous. But if she's not nervous, I don't get nervous. But when I see the flight attendant running back and forth, I said, this is really something is going on. Sure enough, I don't remember exactly at what point it was, the pilot gets on and he says that since we don't know if the wheels are straight or crooked, and the only way we'll find out when we get closer to the airport, other planes will be able to see, that it would be seen by others, and they would be able to say. And but meanwhile, we don't know. I don't remember if he mentioned the crash landing then, or he mentioned it a little bit later. But a little bit later, that's for sure, he said that the wheels are crooked, and we're going to have a crash landing. And he made an announcement. I don't know why he said this, but it didn't help. He said, I want you to know that in all my years of flying, this never happened. This is once in a lifetime experience. Once in a lifetime experience. As we're getting closer, I'm sitting at the aisle, and the student was at the window, and I look at him, and I see that he's crying. And he told me later on that he was able to see, his vantage point, other people crying, because the pilot said we're going to have a crash landing. And as we got closer, I hear him saying, Shema Yisrael. The last thing a Jew is supposed to say before he leaves this world is Shema Yisrael. And at that point, I took out a book of Psalms and I started reciting Psalms. And I said to him, no. Shema Yisrael you say when life is about to be over. When life is about to begin, you sing a joyous melody. And I started singing a joyous melody. And everyone is crying, and I'm singing. It's not that I was nervous, but I felt, if we have to leave this world, let's leave it in a state of joy. And if we're not leaving this world, this is the beginning of a new And sure enough, they told us when the plane lands, we should put our heads down, put our hands behind our necks. And sure enough, the plane made a landing. And somehow the pilot was able to keep the front wheels higher up. Before, those are the wheels that land after the back wheels. And we stopped at a certain point in the special runway, and there were a few fires that broke out in the engines, but everyone got out safe, thank God. There were no casualties, and no one was hurt. That was a miracle. Well, years later, I was once on a JetBlue flight, and I heard the pilot. There was very few people on the plane, so before the flight left off, he was telling about, there was a story that happened in California, the same thing, except while the plane was flying in California, people called the media, and the media was tracking the whole incident. And then the pilot said, it happens all the time with JetBlue. The pilot said they had this little problem, that the wheels don't retract. They corrected it, I think, by now. So that was the end of my talk with this young student. A year later, I was invited to give a talk in a yeshiva, in a Jewish school for college kids who were interested in pursuing Judaism more advanced. And after I finished my talk, a guy comes over to me and he says to me, do you remember me? I said, no. He says, I was the student that was on that plane. He said, because of that incident, because you sang and you demonstrated trust in Hashem, I decided to become an observant Jew. And he turned his whole life around. Now, if I wouldn't have made that move at the beginning of the flight to get a better seat, this whole story would not have happened. Last week we spoke about not learning the wrong lessons from divine providence. A lot of people, especially people who have a mystical bent, like to read things, messages into everything that happens. We just read it yesterday. Joseph is pursued by his mistress, the wife of his master, Potiphar's wife. She tried to seduce him, and he refused, and that's when he ran out, and that was the beginning of the end of the whole story that led to the Jews coming to Egypt, which led to the Exodus and so on, the whole chain of events. But it all began, you could say, when he resisted her charm and her attempts at seducing him. But how would she try to convince him that he should submit to her? So our sages tell us that she was prescient. She had a certain prophetic vision that she's supposed to have a child through Joseph. And as a result, she felt that God already decreed this. This is the fact that it was against the laws of decency and morality to commit adultery, that didn't faze her because she felt she had prophecy. And her prophecy was true to some extent because Joseph married her daughter. So what she saw in the stars, so to speak, with her prophetic vision was somewhat accurate, that Joseph would be the father of her progeny, not her own daughter, her own child, but her child's child. But that's where you can go wrong. People who have dreams, I've had many people write to me or tell me they had this dream, and don't take your dream seriously if it compromises anything that you know is right and is moral. Don't use divine providence. Well, God put me in this room, put me in this situation where I'm close in contact with someone. I'm in a room where there's no one watching and there's some money on the table. No one is there. It's divine providence. Maybe I should take it. You can interpret it that way, but of course that would be perverting. The lesson is that maybe God is testing you, and that's why He put you in that room with that money. But then there are some lighter examples of misplaced purposes. There's a famous Chassidic story of two Jews. One was a very wealthy man, and one was a simple, poor person. And the wealthy man was preparing for Shabbos. He went to the bathhouse, he got himself ready, he was wearing his very expensive attire. And what does he see? He sees a wagon with load in it was stuck in the mud. So he said, I have a mitzvah to help. So he tries to pull the horse and the wagon out of the mud. Not only he doesn't succeed, but now his garments are all ripped. He has mud all over him, and he has bruises all over. And as a result, he goes straight to his hotel room, and he goes to sleep, and he doesn't even celebrate Shabbos. Now normally, when he would celebrate Shabbos, he would invite guests. The poor guests that would come to the synagogue and had no place to go, he would invite them all and feed them like in a royal manner. But now he went to sleep, and he didn't do any of that. Meanwhile, there was a poor man who comes to shul. He was a strong person, but he was poor. And he says to himself, you know what? I want to do a mitzvah also. I want to invite some poor people to my house. So he invites all the poor people. And when the poor people were supposed to be matched with other people, they said, we already have someone who invited us. And what does he serve them? Some stale bread and something as an excuse for a beverage. It was a horrible meal, but he couldn't afford anything better, but he did a mitzvah. And the story is told that when they left this world, their souls came before the heavenly courts, and the court said, you were messed up because the rich man should have been inviting the poor people, and he shouldn't have been schlepping wagons out of the mud that he was incapable of doing. And the poor guy should have been schlepping the wagon out of the mud because he was strong and young, and not invite everyone to his house for a meal. You have to know what your talents are and use them, and not try to find something else that isn't part of your talent, because you're not going to succeed, and that's not why your soul came down into this world. But there are exceptions to every rule. There's an expression in Ethics of the Fathers, b'makom she'ein ish, hishtadel liot ish. Where there's no man, you make an effort to be the man. If there's no one else doing it, if you have no one else who can take the opportunity, you see someone in distress, and there's no one around, and by the time you'll call someone, it'll be too late, you do it. That's your job. Yes?
To take the flip side of that, even though it's God, when Moses gets the responsibility from God to do, I'm not capable of doing this. You got the wrong guy. That's not me. If Moses would have insisted, so even though it's God on the other end, you say God is perfect, He knows. But it's the idea that
Moses,
you don't know anything. The only thing you know is in terms of what will happen. You know God's back. You don't know. You don't know.
But Moses felt that he was not qualified. But God knows a little better.
That's right. That's true.
Okay. So that. it worked out in the end.
It worked out.
If there's no one else, then you have no other choice. God put you in that situation. He wants you to adopt another approach, maybe not permanently, but at least temporarily. So you have to be able to weigh every situation. God gave the Torah to human beings who have intelligence, and we have the power of discernment. You have to know when you have to pursue a certain approach and when you shouldn't pursue that approach. In determining our purpose, we covered some of this briefly. There are 4 existential questions, and we're going to go into them in a little bit more depth. Number 1, who am I? Secondly, what is my purpose? Thirdly, what have I accomplished? Which is God's saying to Adam, where are you? And where am I going? Where am I at? Which situation? Where am I going? What's my itinerary? So the first issue, who am I? We have to remember all these different things. We're a distinct and indispensable part of creation. Nobody could say, I'm useless, I have no purpose. Even a person who is infirm, God forbid, and can't function, they have a purpose as well. Sometimes their purpose involves what they can do. I mentioned in another class, you're in a nursing home. I know someone who was crying to me that they used to be able to do so many things and now they can't do anything. What's the purpose in their life? I said, you can tell someone good morning. You can wish someone to have a good Shabbos. You could do. There are things that you can do, and that's what God wants of you at this point. He's not asking you to build buildings. So everyone has to realize that they are a distinct and indispensable part of creation. Sometimes your being is there to facilitate someone else doing good. In other words, someone else, that's why, some people don't like when others help them, because they feel that it takes away their dignity, that they have to be helped by others. But you have to sometimes think a little differently. Sometimes you have to think, maybe my situation is such that I can enable someone else to help me and give them the opportunity to do a mitzvah and to fulfill their purpose. So sometimes being the recipient is not a sign that you're helpless or you have no purpose. It's a sign that God at this point wants you to be the one who enables others to do the right thing. And that's not always so easy. In the Torah there's a part where it talks about contributing to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. And God says, V'yichu li truma, they shall take unto me an offering. And the question is, it should have said, V'yitnu, they shall give me the offering, not take from me an offering. So one explanation is that sometimes God tells you to give. Sometimes God says, I want you to be on the receiving end, but do it for me. Do it not because you feel helpless and you have to take help from someone. You're doing it because you are making it possible for others to do good. So sometimes when someone wants to help you, you say, no, please, I can do it myself, or I don't need the help, or I don't want the help, because we're too proud. And that's a normal reaction. But sometimes we should think to ourselves, but maybe I'm giving that person an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and I'm helping them. And when you help them, you're doing a mitzvah as well. It's no less of a mitzvah to give charity than to receive it, to enable someone to give charity, or whatever help. So that's what we have to recognize. Every one of us is an indispensable part of creation. And we are created, the Torah says, in God's image. What does that mean? It could mean a lot of things, but one of the things that it means is that we are all endowed with intellect, and therefore we are all capable of free choice. Unlike all the other parts of creation that don't have the requisite intelligence, and they don't really have free choice. So it means we are responsible for our actions because we do have free choice. And then we have to know that we all possess an animal soul and a resistant body. The body does not necessarily want to do the right thing. It's interested in taking care of its physical needs and pleasures, like an animal, which is self-centered. We have to know our weaknesses. God created us with those weaknesses. We didn't buy them. We didn't go out and acquire them. We were created with them. But we also have to know that we also possess a divine soul, a godly spark, that there's a part of us that is divine. And that part of us has to be allowed to manifest itself to help us control the animal within us. One of the very beautiful metaphors that is used, especially in Chassidic discussion, is that we're all diamonds. The Baal Shem Tov said, commenting on a biblical verse, that every one of us is like the earth. What does the earth contain? It contains a lot of things that are not good or not clean, but deep down in the earth you'll find treasures. You'll find diamonds. That every one of us has those diamonds. There's a famous story of the Rebbe Rashab. He was the 5th Chabad Rebbe. And he had a chassid, one of his followers, who was a scholar, a pious man, very wealthy. He was a diamond dealer. And he once came to the Rebbe to have a meeting with him, an audience with him. And there was a simple Jew who went before him. The Rebbe spent a long time with a simple Jew, like an hour, and with him a few minutes, 5 minutes, and it bothered him. You know, out of respect to the Rebbe, he wouldn't tell the Rebbe, why did you give that man who's a simple Jew, is not known for anything outstanding, and me, the scholar, the pious man, the philanthropist, me, you only gave 5-10 minutes. So it bothered him. But he didn't express his displeasure until later, much later. What happened was, he would often donate a diamond to the Rebbe to use for his charitable causes. So when he would come to the Rebbe to give him the diamond, he would show him his supply of gems, and he would pick out the nicest one. So at the end of his stay with the Rebbe, he took out his diamonds and he points to one in the middle and he says, "This is the best diamond." And the Rebbe picks it up. I don't see anything about it. Doesn't look anything. Oh, what's so beautiful about this diamond? And the man's trying to explain to him that this diamond is exquisite. It's worth more than any of the other diamonds, and it's wonderful. And the Rebbe says, "No, to me it doesn't do anything for me. I don't think it's so special." At one point he becomes a little exasperated, and he says to the Rebbe, "You have to be a connoisseur." And the Rebbe says to him, "Yes, you have to be a connoisseur on souls. What you think was a simple Jew and not worthy of my time, and your soul is so much better," says, "you're not a connoisseur of souls. I am a connoisseur of souls, and I treated the person who deserved it because he is a special gem." The Rebbe would have every Sunday, sometimes more than every Sunday, where he would give $1 to every man, woman, and child that would come by. And at the age of 90, he would stand 7 hours straight, no break, just handing out dollar bills to people, intending for them to give it to charity or give a replacement to charity and add some of their own. And he would bless everyone that would come by. And here's a man at close to 90, and he's standing there 7 hours, and means he didn't eat anything that day. And he's just standing on his feet. He wouldn't sit, he would only stand. And he was once asked, "Why don't you sit?" He said, "Out of respect for the people, he wants to stand." And he would just shower blessings to thousands of people. There would be between 5,000 and 10,000 people every Sunday. And the money was donated to him that he could use for any of his causes. but he chose to give it to other people. Let them give it to the charity of their choice. Now the Rebbe is standing for many hours, close to 90 years old, and a young woman who was stood on line for about 2 hours comes before the Rebbe, and she looks at him and she says, I don't understand. I'm so much younger than you, and I'm so weary from standing for 2 hours, and you're standing for many more hours, and you're 3 times my age, and you look spry, you look alert, you look alive. You don't look tired. And the Rebbe said, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired. He looked at every one that came by as a diamond. One final diamond story, I just heard it a few days ago. There was a young man who grew up in the Soviet Union. He was a young kid, and because it was the Soviet Union, they were forced to go to public school. They couldn't go to a Jewish school. And in public school, they had to hide their affiliation with their Chassidic parents and way of life. So here it's recess, and there's a map, a large map on the wall, a map of the Soviet Union. And they're looking, he and his friend were looking for the city of Lubavitch, where his grandparents came from. City of Lubavitch is, the largest cities in the world, Mexico City. Lubavitch is probably second. It probably has a few hundred people. It's a hamlet. It doesn't show up on a map. So they're looking for, but they were the little kids, and they knew that their grandfather came from Lubavitch. They imagined that it was a large city. So they're looking on the map, and they can't find the city of Lubavitch. Meanwhile, their communist teacher sees them looking at a map, and he's delighted. My students are so much into geography. And in recess, they're not playing ball, but they're looking at a map. So she says to them, what are you looking for? He says, we're looking, my grandfather comes from a town, Lubavitch, and we can't find it. He said, well, I never heard of it, Lubavitch, but let's go inside. There's an atlas that I have. And sure enough, they find Lubavitch was like a little tiny print compared to the other cities. And they say there must be a mistake. It couldn't possibly be that Lubavitch is just a small town. It must be a large city. But the teacher said, I'll tell you what, I can explain why it doesn't show up. Because sometimes the Soviet Union had secret factories in certain towns, and they didn't want the enemy to know about it, so they would minimize the value of those towns. But really, it's a big city, but there might be some top secret goings on there, and that was why it was reduced. Well, they were satisfied with that explanation, but they were curious to know what top secret factories were there in that town. So they meet their grandfather, who grew up in Lubavitch and was a student at the Lubavitch Yeshiva, that was a very major institution. And they said, is it true that there were some secret factories and secret operations in Lubavitch? And the grandfather understood where they're coming from, and he says, yes, it's true. He says, well, what did you do there? That was top secret. He says, they would polish diamonds there. They would polish diamonds. So the young child said to his grandfather, then how come you're so poor? You should have taken some of those diamonds with you. And the grandfather broke down crying, says, yeah, we were young and foolish. We didn't realize how precious the diamonds that we had there, and we didn't take it with us. What he meant that he didn't take enough spirituality from there. But so there are places where they polish diamonds. So that's who I am, where I'm a diamond. We're all diamonds, but covered up. Those diamonds can be covered up. One final story in this regard. There was a Jew who moved from Russia to Chicago. This is a true story. The others were also true, by the way. This Jew goes to Chicago, and coming to America caused a lot of assimilation, and a lot of Jews lost their Judaism crossing the Atlantic. They used to say that they would take their tefillin and throw it into the ocean. America is different. We have to be like Americans. We can't be like Jews. And this man from Chicago came from a Chassidic family. The previous Rebbe sent one of his Chassidim, who was a distinguished rabbi, Rabbi Levitin was his name. He sent him to Chicago and says, I want you to try to get this Jew to come back to his roots. So go there and spend time with him. So he comes to Chicago and notify the man that he's coming there, and the man was convinced that he came to raise funds. That's what rabbis would do. They would travel around the country raising funds for their institutions. So he stays there for 2 weeks, and the man doesn't see him leaving the house. He was there, he prayed there, he studied Torah, he had discussions, and 2 weeks go by and doesn't leave the house. So at the end of the 2 weeks, when he's ready to return, after warming him up and really getting him back to his roots, the man says to him, I didn't see you going anywhere. What did you come for? He didn't realize that he came for him. So he said, I'll tell you what, in Europe there used to be an itinerant scribe. Not every community could afford its own scribe to check the Torah scrolls to make sure they're written properly. So the itinerant scribe would go from town to town, and if he would check the Torah scrolls, if there was a letter that was missing or smudged or defective in some way, he would fix it. So he said the same thing is true with souls. Every one of us has letters of the Torah in us. Sometimes those letters could become erased, they can become smudged. And I'm the itinerant scribe who travels to different towns to help restore the letters. So the man was very impressed, and he was successful in his mission. When he came back to the Rebbe to report to the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe of his very clever metaphor. And the Rebbe says, no, you got it wrong. Says the Torah scroll has letters on it, and the letters could be erased. The tablets had letters in them as well, but they were engraved. They can't be erased. What can happen is that dirt can cover them so you don't see the engraved letters. The letters of the Torah are engraved and etched in every one of us. You can't erase them. You can only cover them up. And every now and then we have to do some dusting off of those letters. So what is my purpose? So there are many ways of expressing it, but they all amount almost to the same thing. To connect to God. How do you connect to live a godly life? How do we live a godly life? By following the Torah, which ultimately causes us to tame and transform the body and animal soul. And this, in the large picture, makes the plan that God had for creation a reality, that the world becomes filled with divine light, and that's the messianic reality. When we do enough mitzvahs, the critical mass of the good that we do has the power to change the whole world. And that's what our purpose is. Our purpose is to be one part of that whole overall mission. And anyone who says, well, I can only do my little part, my little contribution, should realize that your contribution is indispensable. Yeah.
Rabbi, and getting back to that metaphor that you were just giving about the Torah is engraved. Is he or you? Are you referring to that engraving is the divine soul?
The letters of the Torah are engraved in each and every one of us. They're etched in us. They're part of us, but they can be covered up.
But is that
they can't be erased?
Is that synonymous with the divine soul?
No, he was using it as a metaphor for the letters of the Torah. But you want to use it for the divine soul. It's for sure the divine soul is part of us. We wouldn't have a divine soul. Our animal soul wouldn't exist.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a different point. So now the question is, what have I accomplished and where am I going? That must be answered by each of us personally. That is no standardized answer. Everyone has to reflect and take stock of where they are and where they're going. They say that Einstein was once on a train, and the conductor comes aboard to check the tickets to see if they had a ticket. And Einstein couldn't find his ticket. So the conductor, who realized who it was, says, don't worry, I trust you. If you say you bought a ticket, I trust you. I don't have to find your ticket. You're good to go. But Einstein is crawling under the seats looking for his ticket. So the man says, I told you, I trust you. Why are you looking for your ticket? And Einstein says, I'm looking to find out where I'm going. You could be Einstein, but you don't necessarily know where you're going. Someone was interviewing the Rebbe. I think it was a Reform rabbi who wrote a book, 9.5 Mystics. I don't know if you heard of that book. He was the half mystic in the book, and the Rebbe is one of the 9. And when the Rebbe told him the story that when Adam was hiding and God says, Ayeka, where are you? That's a call to every one of us, and God asks us, where are you? Where are you holding? And where are you going? So he asked the Rebbe, he had a little chutzpah, he says, the Rebbe, did you ever ask that question of yourself? Because the Alter Rebbe, I forgot to mention, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, who actually gave that interpretation to this Russian minister, that God comes to every person and asks them, where are you? Later on, the Alter Rebbe said that question saved his life. Why? Because at that point, he was in such a high state of spiritual ecstasy, exhilaration, because he felt that he had the great privilege that he was spending time in prison and being persecuted because of his devotion to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the godly teachings, that his soul was about to leave his body. And at that moment, the minister comes in and asks him, why does God say, where are you? And he gives him the answer. God asks you, where are you in terms of your purpose in this life? He says, and I realized I applied it to myself. Did God create me that I should leave this world? He gave me a mission in this world and not to fly high away from this world. And that saved my life. So this rabbi, Weiner, I believe was his name, says to the Rebbe, do you ever ask yourself that question? And the Rebbe said, and in other words, and what's your answer? So the Rebbe said there are two kinds of people, have different missions. There are people who are in position of leadership. They can't answer the question. It's the people who they lead can answer it for them. Because if the people who they lead don't benefit from this person, that means you're on the wrong business. You're not qualified to be a leader. So the Rebbe said, I can't answer it if I'm going in the right path. The people who I lead, they can answer it for you. But every one of us has both roles, obviously. We have the role as an individual, and we have the role as someone who can influence others. You heard everyone is talking about influencers. Every one of us is an influencer. And the only ones who can really determine if we're on the right path in terms of our influence is what is the effect on the people that we lead. In the Ethics of the Fathers, there's a discussion about the differences between Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, and Bilam, the heathen evil prophet. And it goes on to explain the differences between their students, their disciples. How do you know if someone is great? If they're great in their own right, but they don't have any disciples, they don't impact others, then their greatness is limited. It's not really anything meaningful. You have to always look at how did you influence others, and that reflects on you. We're quoting a lot from Ethics of the Fathers because there's a lot there that deals with our purpose. Akavia ben Mahalal, one of the great sages, said the following: reflect upon three things, and you will not come to the handles of sin. Handles of sin means he won't even come close to sin if you reflect on these three things. Know from where you came, and you should know where you're going, and before whom you are destined to be judged and given accounting. And then it gives a third, then it explains it in more detail. And what I'm going to show is the Rebbe shows that these are three different answers addressed to three types of people. And what I would like to add is that every one of us has elements of all these three. They're addressed to three categories. In the Talmud, there's a delineation of three personality types. There's the Tzaddik, the righteous person, the good person, the one who's always good, who's not conflicted, is not in a struggle. Then you have the Beinoni, the intermediate guy, who is constantly struggling, but manages to hold his head above water, but due to struggle. And then there's the Rasha. The Rasha can be translated as evildoer, wicked, rebellious. And each one of these paragraphs is addressed to each of these categories. And each one of us, I believe, has times and element when we are a tzaddik, when we're in a spiritual high, and we're just very positive, and we don't even have to struggle. And there's times when most of the times we do struggle, and we're successful. And then there are times when we submit and succumb to the temptations, and we are in the rebellious state. Every one of us has all these three. In fact, in Passover we have the four sons. They're not four sons, they're four states of mind. There's a part of us that's the chacham, the wise son. There's the part of us that's the rebellious, the simple, and the one doesn't ask questions, the indifferent one. So these are all different phases within each of our lives. So from where you came, from a putrid drop, where are you going? To a place of dust, maggots, and worms, and before whom you are destined to be judged and given accounting before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is He. So here we're going to show how each one of these is addressed to a different audience or to a different phase in our lives. The first clause, reflect upon three things, is directed to tzaddikim, spiritually high people, righteous people who are not conflicted, or at times in our lives when we don't feel a struggle. We're just in the right place. Everyone could identify those times in our lives when we feel we're going in the right direction, we're in the right place, and we feel uplifted. So for that person, he only has to reflect on three things. Forget about the rest. They have to know that there are three things. What are the three things in life? There's God, there's us, and our need to relate to one another, to relate to God, and the rest of the world. That we're not living in isolation, we're not living as hermits. We have to relate to and affect the rest of the world, starting with our own bodies, our own possessions, and the world in close proximity to us. They have to know that there are three things. And as I mentioned in an earlier class, the Midrash says that Adam sinned because he only saw two. And that's a cryptic remark, but one way of looking at it is that he only recognized God and himself. He didn't recognize the impact he has on the whole world. When he ate of the tree of knowledge, he impacted not just himself, he impacted the world around him. So he saw two. If you leave out one element, if you leave out God, obviously you're in big trouble. But you can not leave out God, but you can relegate him to a secondary position. If you leave yourself out of it, you're in trouble. And if you leave the rest of the world out of it, you're in trouble. And you can always experience decline, spiritual decline and degradation. And that's why he says if you reflect on these three things, you won't even come close to sin. You'll always maintain your heightened state of mind. That's the first group. Then we go to the Beinoni, the intermediate person, the in-betweener, the one who's constantly or frequently in conflict and manages to win those battles, but it's a struggle. This person, it's not enough for him to know there are three things. If you're righteous, all you have to know is, what do you, God, what do you want me to do? There's a verse in this book of Psalms where King David says to God, Ana Hashem ki ani avdecha, please, O God, I beseech you, O God, because I am your servant. But the word Ana, which is translated as please or I beseech you, is spelled in a way that could also mean where, God. And the person, the righteous person comes before God and says, God, just tell me where do you want me to go? You want me to jump off the roof? Just tell me which roof. That's the righteous person. There's no conflict, there's no struggle. Just tell me where. But the person who has the struggle needs a boost. So he has to know the source, that he has a soul, and the source of the soul is with God. And he has to know also the trajectory and the destination. You have to know that you're moving forward towards the Messianic age. And you have to realize that we'll stand before God who transcends the physical and even spiritual existence. And we're standing before a just and compassionate God. So there's no negative over here. It's all positive. This person doesn't have to be told anything that breaks him. No need for tough love, just love. Because that's what you need when you have a struggle. Because you're basically in the right place. You're not going out committing crimes. You're not a type of person who's going to hurt others. You're not a type of person who's going to shirk their responsibilities. You just have a struggle, and sometimes you can lose the battle, so you need a boost. So you have to know your source, your soul, where you're going, and that God is the compassionate and just God, and you don't have to worry. You'll be in good terms with God. Everything will be taken care of. But what about if you're the Rasha, you're the bad guy? Or the times in our lives when we're rebellious, when we're not towing the line. Sometimes you have to tell the person about the negatives of evil. You have to focus on the internal evil to recognize the vanity of our physical existence without the soul. Without the soul, we're just a product of a putrid drop. That's all we are. And we're only fodder for maggots and worms. If you're looking at the person physically, that's all we are. If you look at the person as endowed with a soul, then it changes the whole story. So it depends what state you're in. In certain states, you just have to know, what's the mission? Where do you want me to go? Which roof do you want me to jump off? The second state you're in, you have to know and get a spiritual boost to know what your source is and what your destination is and before whom you're judged. But if you're in a bad mood and you're really rebellious and just not interested in anything positive, you're just totally selfish and self-centered, you have to break that bubble of complacency, of security, and recognize you're nothing. Without the soul, without the spiritual, you're nothing. Okay, I think we'll leave the rest for next week. Any questions first? No question? When you ask questions, you give me an opportunity to drink my coffee. So you're doing me a favor by asking.
Will we have a class on Tuesday?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned anger in the beginning. How do you let go of anger? You said it's destructive, obviously, but...
How do you let go of anger? One way is to recognize that the cause of your anger might not be justified. King David was cursed by a certain very distinguished person, horrible curses. And what does King David say? Because why should I get upset? God wanted him to curse me, so he cursed me. It's not, I shouldn't take it personal. Then, of course, there's a simpler approach. You get angry because someone insulted you. But you know what? Maybe the person knows something about myself that I didn't pay attention to, and maybe I have to work on that. So you can actually use the insult to your benefit. And then you could say, you know, why do I get upset? Am I that special that I can't be ever criticized? Why is it that people will sometimes criticize themselves, but if someone else says it to them, they get upset? They know it's true, so imagine that you're saying it to yourself. And when you say it to yourself, it doesn't hurt, it just helps, because you recognize your own deficiency and you're willing to correct it.